sunflower domestication started from about 5,000 years ago by the North American Indians. And they started working on the sunflower at 300,000 BC, and it was only until like 1510, and Spanish explorers went to America and discovered America, discovered the sunflower. And then they brought the sunflower back to the Europe, and then from there it went to France and Italy and all the way east to Russia. And the early stages of sunflower development, I think there was a, you can consider it was started in Russia from 1830 to 1840, and sunflower was lucky. The church has some kind of rules prohibiting the use of sunflower oil. The other oil and sunflower was not on the list. So sunflower used this opportunity and then organized its work, and it became a good cooking oil since that time. And the first big breakthrough was in about 1880s. Then the sunflower production in Russia reached 150,000 hectares, and then it kept expanding. And in Russia, the production reached about 1 million hectares in 1911 to 16. All these dates are approximate, and I don't think they're exact. They are variable a little bit. And then in about mid-1900, it came back from the Europe to North America quite late, about mid-1900s. And then the Russians continued to work on the sunflower oil type improvement. And from 1940 to 1965, they finally reached the oil content to about 55%. And the oil content seems to stay steady until today. And then about 1969 to 1970, there was another breakthrough of the sunflower, was the discovery of cytoplasmic male sterility and the fertility restoration. And the use of hybrid vigor and development of hybrid crops was already popular for many other crops, and sunflower just utilized this opportunity to start the development of hybrid sunflower. And then another important development of the sunflower is mostly on the oil side, because the oil sunflower industry was very strong, and they got more support from government, from private, and so all the advancement seems to happen with the oilseed sunflower. But it also helped the development of the confection. The confection sunflower developed side by side with the oilseed sunflower, but it was maybe slightly behind a little bit. So in 1976, the Russians also developed the high oleic permanent sunflower, which was used widely subsequently by a lot of countries. And then in the 1980s, the embryo rescue technique was very popular, and which was very kind of practical and useful for making interspecific process, which was impossible or very difficult before 1980s, using the conventional seed for the interspecific process. And then after that, there are certain important discoveries in sunflower research was the oil quality. So the Spanish group, including Leo's group, they did a lot of work on this hypometric stearic, and other people working on continuing work of oleic sunflower lines, high oleic. And also the tocopherol study was also making good progress, so demonstrating that there were sources of not high alpha tocopherol, also beta and gamma, and they will improve the antioxidant capacity of the sunflower seeds, and the high oleic, the use of high oleic also will improve the sunflower seed storage and stability. So this is a very short, brief statement of the sunflower history. And then I got some data on the global sunflower production. You can look at this charts very easily, and they are I listed the top 6 countries that produce the most highest amount of confection sunflower. Russia's the number 1, and China number 2, and Ukraine number 3. But the proportion of the confection sunflower in production versus the oil sunflower, and most countries are about 10 to 12% of confection versus 90% of the oil seeds. But the only oddball is the second one, China. China does not have a huge sunflower production acreage, but China has a very high percentage of confection sunflower. And presently, China has 95% the production in confection. And these 6 countries' production accounts for about more than 90% or maybe 95% of the total global production of sunflower confection type. And the yield kilogram per hectare, it can vary from about a little bit less than 2,000 kilogram per hectare to almost 3,000. And China, even now, they are reaching about 4,000 kilogram per hectare. So all this situation, depending, the yield per hectare is depending on the local growing condition, hybrid they use, and mostly are related to the cultural practices or the environmental conditions. And another place I found some data was the U.S. sunflower production from 1975 to 2016, covering the stage before the hybrid production and then the hybrid production and the utilization of the herbicide-resistant types. You can see in the first, the 2 years, 1975 to 76, mostly, conventional type, and and the oil type and versus confection in the U.S. type, U.S. sunflower production is around, a little bit less than 20%, and then the yield of confection and the oil types are not very different. So they are, almost exactly the same. And there is a kind of jump between 2001 to 2008 period to 2009 to 2016 period. I think it must be because of the use of the wind control. So that there is a big jump over there. And also one small jump from open pollinate hybrids to the use of open pollinated variety to the hybrids. And for many years it was the yield was not increased. But finally, when we have these herbicide-resistant types, the yield increased significantly. And I use Chinese data because the Chinese sunflower development started rather late, much later than the rest of the world. And so they have more documented data that I can find. So I just use them as an example, whether they are successful or they failed, they have good points or bad points, I can bring it out. I stand neutral. I'm not doing the advertisement for Chinese production because they are not, the best. But we use it as an example for our future, and we can use it to predict the future success. And Chinese sunflower production from 1960 to 1970, they were in the northeastern province. I'll show you a map later on of China. And then later on, because they did not manage their Sclerotinia resistance, even by rotation, and farmers, because it was very profitable, so the farmers continuously grow sunflower year after year, and then Sclerotinia hay rot became serious. They got pushed out to northeastern provinces, moving west. And from 1950 to 1990, over a period of 40 years, they were growing Chinese land races. And then after that, they classified the Chinese production into three different distinctive periods. One is from 1990 to 2000. Primarily, they were growing open pollinated varieties. And some are imported and some are their own. And even for a short period of time, they grew a lot of Russian open pollinated periodic because it had a very high oil percentage. But overall, China has about 80% confection, 20% of oil type. And then from 2000 to 2010, they grew some open pollinated types, and then they started to introduce a large number of Western hybrids because they were mostly very tolerant to diseases or insects or whatever. They had a more hybrid vigor, and the hybrid varieties were well established. So the Chinese traders, or you can call them traders, or you can call them seed companies. They had a lot of seed companies, so just imported the seeds mostly from U.S. and sold to the farmers at very high prices. They counted the kernel by kernel, and and that's the period that in China the sunflower hybrid varieties, really occupy the Chinese market for a long time until 2010, and then they started to have their own because then the reason was the Western hybrids, the taste was not as nice as the Chinese people would like to have. Or the government tightened the importation and made it almost impossible to introduce the foreign hybrids for planting. So from 2010 to 2020, mostly are domestic private hybrids. And then you can, again, to group them, the Chinese sunflower production in 4 different periods. The first period was the older land race period, and then start with open pollinated, imported hybrids, and then the domestic hybrids. And you can see that their acreage, stay at close to 1 million hectares. And then their yield, production, when they go from land race to open pollinated varieties, there was a kind of jump in the yield. But then from open pollinated to the foreign hybrids, the increase was not so significant. But then from the foreign hybrids to domestic hybrids, and then there's a big jump. And but this is the average yield, but there are variations over there. So the Chinese sunflower went through all these 4 stages, and you can see the their main production used to be here. And then head rot sclerotina came, they were pushed toward this side, toward here. And the yellow one is their secondary production area, and the orange one is their primary production area. Now they are pushing mostly into Xinjiang province because there are new land. They never had planted sunflower, but I don't know how good the soil over in Xinjiang is. I have Chinese friend there. Maybe you can answer the questions. Some of the new land, and I assume maybe not so premium for sunflower. That's why I thought that sunflower is moving from fertile land to poorer land. The selection for tolerance to poor growing conditions will be very critical. And this is the Chinese specific problem. Is some of the seeds got problem with a spot on the seed coat that will reduce their sale price in the market. And it is caused by the strict feeding on the young growing seeds. So now every company is using the drones to fly over the field for controlling thrips, and so the quality is improved. But they still don't have any resistant types through breeding. They just use chemical control. So that's their special problem. And now, and after many years, I think the confectionery sunflower industry has developed some targeted seed quality or agronomic characteristics for people to use as a standard for their confectionery sunflower. So like the seed length, the Chinese one wanted to be very long, like a 2.3 centimeter seed width. They wanted to be larger than 1 centimeter, and the 1,000 seed weight they want to be 200 grams. But the Western is just, the requirement is not so strict for 1,000 seed weights. Like above 100 is okay. The kernel ratio in China, because they have a large seed, so the kernel ratio is a little bit lower. And then the protein content is the same, oil content is the same, and the plant height, and here they want it to be down to 190 centimeters, but the current Chinese sunflower production are way over to 2 meters. Very tall. It's very difficult. I don't know why they still hang on to this high and big plant, and the rest of the world, the height is much reduced, like 175. So there are more requirements for the seed quality. I know, there are a lot of people working on confection in this room, so they can answer these questions much better than I can. Okay, and then you can compare, the open pollinated sunflower and the hybrids in China, and these are there are 14 Chinese open pollinated sunflower varieties, versus 27 hybrid from the public institutes, and from 1960 to 2016. You can see a general trend. I summarized here. It's very interesting to notice. On the bottom line, you can see the southern seed weight increased a little bit, by 4% from open pollinated to hybrids, but the seed length reduced by 14%, and the seed width reduced by 10%, and the seed protein reduced, maybe not very critical, from by 12%. Maturity date is shorter, and the yield has increased by 20%. That's again through the use of hybrid rigor, and the kernel ratio did not change.
Dr. Yang, we have 4 minutes remaining.
Okay, so now, and I am going to shorten And what I am thinking about the sunflower production globally is we have a lot of problems, and some we can solve easily, some we cannot. The main reason is because the confection sunflowers' genetic variability is very limited. Even the oil season is limited. The confection is even more limited because all the sunflower germplasm came from American Indian land races. It was already limited. So I think we have to go into the wild species and to utilize the wider source of resistance material or whatever we need to add to the confection sunflower background. And then we have that source of resistance or source of variability, and we can have a solid base to solve all the challenges of the sunflower. And currently we have bloom rate resistance that has been bothering the sunflower for many years, 20 or 30 years, because we're talking about every country has a different, has new races arising, and we have a problem of solving it. But if you look into the wild species, wild perennials are almost immune to all the new races of bloom rate, and they are single gene or very simply inherited. They're very easy to transfer. With all the modern technology, we can transfer them from wild species into the cultivated as easy as we can transfer from other cultivated material. And also for the sclerotinia, people always so afraid of sclerotinia, and we lose the fighting spirit because sclerotinia is difficult, but I don't think sclerotinia is impossible. We cannot say, oh, sclerotinia is so difficult, we give up. We never give up because you can look at the oil seeds percentage. The sunflower has been so for so many years, it never reached that high as 55. It stayed around 35 for many years until the Russians they developed some specific selection method, and then reached 55, from 35 to 55 in a very short period of time. And you don't have to start with immune material to begin with. You can start with mediumly resistant, and you accumulate many of the medium resistance, you will reach the high resistance. In sclerotinia, we don't expect to have immune material for sclerotinia, but we do believe that we can get a very high level of resistance to sclerotinia into our commercial sunflower variety. That's why I thought that the sunflower, has with today's technology, I believe sunflower has a very bright future. I believe all the problems can be solved very easily. And given time, with the international cooperation, with the utilization of all the available germplasm, sunflower has a very bright future. That's what I believe, and I hope you guys will believe that too. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chien. Now wait, please. We have time for some questions. If you have any question, please.
I have enough people to answer the questions for you, not me.
Anyway, we have no questions, so no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chien.